Chapter 1063. What is he talking about? Blood Demon rubbed his chin as he pondered. Actually, Luonan really didn't say much. He should have asked what Blood Demon was doing. Before Blood Demon could adjust his thoughts, the scene in the swimming pool made the extraordinaries beside the pool raise their eyebrows. They blinked, they looked pensive, and some simply sneered. Luonan didn't seem to make any obvious movements, but the ox demon which had been struggling in the pool went completely rigid. His body began to expand at a visible rate, and then it began to wither. During this period of time, whether it was the head, the body, or the limbs, they all let out crisp crackling sounds. At first it sounded a bit like the twisting of joints, but then it connected densely together. It was simply like a firecracker had been lit within the ox demon's body. In addition to its expanding and contracting form, it wouldn't be strange at all if the ox demon were to explode into mincemeat in the next moment. The perspective of a normal person was roughly like this, but a group of extraordinaries certainly wouldn't be this shallow. They could more or less feel the stability and regularity of this seemingly bizarre and intense transformation from beginning to end. It looks like this Mr. Luo has done quite a bit of research on secret orders. Black Lion, who had been ignored twice in a row, was still laughing merrily as he half reclined in his chair. He rubbed his round belly that was mostly exposed, actively participating in topics related to Luonan. Some people ignored him, but others were willing to talk. Star Shaman's thin lips trembled as he replied with a smile. It's the reverse output of life force. That ox demon no longer has any value in healing. Rather than tormenting itself with repairs, it's better to preserve something more valuable. However, the mental expression of the power of faith and incense interchanges with the energy of the living body. The efficiency is actually quite good. Constance muttered, the switching structure is truly beautiful. The three who were on the mental side were certainly able to see in much more detail than those who were on the fleshly side. Therefore, Blood Demon and the others didn't want to display their slight skill in front of an expert. They just spoke, having a deeper meaning of chatting. Is it really good to leave him hanging here? Yes, I feel that this child talker is quite pitiful. Blood Demon didn't have the slightest self-awareness of being the instigator of all this. Or perhaps he was more interested in Talker's current state. It's too far ahead, so I don't know what's going on. Say, with my friendship with him, it shouldn't be a problem to ask a few more questions. Hey, you've been doing this for so long and you still haven't found out anything? Wan Luhua simply replied, this is not my style. Connections? In this world, who dares to boast that they have a way and can go all the way? Blood Demon sneered, Sister Luo, you can't be fooled by that old man. This time Wan Luhua couldn't even be bothered to look at him. It was also at this moment that Talker, who had been silent for a long time under her hand, suddenly shuddered. His eyes widened as he let out a gurgling sound. The flashing electric sparks on his body flickered even more frequently and clashed with each other. The deeper layers of the magnetic field also entered a state of chaos. This was no longer a simple bone and joint problem. Lightning flashed in Wan Liaohua's pupils. There were many details that were incompatible with her, but if she were to control it conservatively and simply control the chaotic qi dynamic. Don't. Just as Wan Luhua was about to do so, Talker hissed and stopped her. In his widened eyes, his capillaries and ambitions were wildly expanding. Although he was previously seriously injured and looked miserable, his body's condition and level had always been improving. The level of electromagnetic power circulation had already risen to a level that he didn't even dare to imagine. Otherwise, how could he have attracted the attention of so many transcendents? Therefore, Talker had always been quietly learning, experiencing, and memorizing this feeling. He was also trying to make the circulation mode of this power truly imprint itself into his bones. If he were to change it rashly, this opportunity might immediately collapse. No matter what, he couldn't let this opportunity slip through his fingers. He panted heavily and did his best to enunciate his words to express his attitude. My opportunity has arrived. The problem was that the others had a different opinion. Wan Luhua frowned and immediately shook her head. It's just an illusion. I can do it. Talker was in an extremely excited state. Even if the person in front of him was the authority of the transcendents who cultivated in the fleshly side, as well as a great teacher who taught and taught, he couldn't care less. I can definitely. Before he could finish speaking, a voice like a cold wind flowed by his ear. This isn't called an opportunity. The source of the voice was Luo Nan. That person was still above the center of the pool. He was just slightly distracted. He turned his head and made a conclusion. You can't digest it. Talker was stuck with the appearance of the main character. There was no doubt that he didn't have the confidence to refute this young man who had casually given him the opportunity to climb to the peak. But Talker really wasn't willing to easily give up on such a rare opportunity. His mouth trembled for a long time before he forced himself to speak. Give me a chance. Uncle Luo, I want to try. At a time like this, calling him Uncle Luo was really smooth. Luo Nan's reaction didn't change at all. In fact, he was just temporarily distracted. Right now, most of his mental energy was still focused on the ingredients. Yes, on yoga. Luo Nan had even condensed water vapor to attempt a deeper segmentation foundation. He borrowed the achievements of the School of Fantasy to design a more suitable process for Niu Gui's current transformation process. He wanted to see if he could truly turn Niu Gui onto the path of a fantasy breed. This could be considered another verification of the structure of the mica. This was a very important matter. It was related to Luo Nan's main design for a period of time in the future. It was one of the most crucial links to complete the whimsical plan of a new plane simulation. However, Talker's weight wasn't low. In terms of practicality, Talker was even stronger. Of course, Talker's stubborn, greedy, and foolish choice didn't benefit anyone. Luo Nan decided to temporarily stop Niu Gui's transformation and design work to let Talker sober up a bit. So he crooked his finger at Talker. Talker was stunned. He clearly didn't react. Luo Nan didn't expect him to understand either. Talker, who was about to speak and plead again, suddenly went into a daze in the next second. Then he reached back to touch his throat, completely forgetting the fact that his arm was broken. The pain and the effects of his loss of function caused his arm to freeze midway as he lifted it. However, there was an eye-catching bulge in his throat. There was a clear foreign object wriggling upwards, squeezing into his mouth from his throat. Then it opened up his mouth and swelled out. It was a lump of bright red wriggling flesh. It looked like a creature that had been skinned and dripping with blood. It wasn't just his throat and his mouth. Even the pores on Talker's upper arms and chest seeped out blood-red strands. They wriggled into lines and floated up. They seemed to have a magnetic effect as they blended together with the lump of flesh that had just protruded out of his mouth. They swirled and took shape. Some of the strands directly transformed into slender tentacles. They were completely separated from Talker. They just stuck to the outer layer of the lump of flesh, fluttering in the sea breeze. Chapter 1064. Tu Gu, who was a little further away, Wang Yong, who was at the corner, and Black Lion, who was sitting on the round chair, immediately recognized it. This thing was the bloody sarcoma that was previously used as a key hub for blood transformation. It was first possessed by Luo Nan, then crushed by Tu Gu, and then seeped into Talker's body. Now it was actually extracted and reconstructed to its original state. Once it was extracted, Talker's energy converged and operated mode immediately collapsed. During this period, Talker did his best to maintain the mode according to his memories, hoping that this mode could be preserved. The problem was that this seemingly profound memory was nothing more than an illusion pieced together by various neurotransmitter stimuli after a series of key details were lost. The so-called mode was just a building made of feathers. It collapsed spontaneously without the slightest disturbance. Talker completely lost his composure when the great road to breaking through the extraordinary door collapsed in front of him. His body suddenly bounced up, wanting to grab the power that had turned into nothingness. A muffled sound rang out. Wan Luhua felt that Talker was too noisy and simply knocked him unconscious. The back of Talker's head smashed onto the table leg and then the ground. He was completely unconscious. As for the bloody sarcoma that had just been extracted, it was still floating stably in midair. It continued to make fine adjustments to its appearance. It was still twitching slightly, just like a demonic creature, or the organ of a living creature. He must have had a hard time suppressing his ambition all these years. The blood demon used the tip of his foot to poke Talker's waist. Seeing no reaction, he shrugged. It seems that Xianxia has given him too much pressure. He even has a father like that. None of the extraordinaries present were interested in other people's melodramatic dramas. Everyone's attention had already naturally shifted to the bloody sarcoma. The star shaman seemed to be curious as he asked, "What is this thing?" "Oh, my brother Luo is returning it to its rightful owner." The Black Lion jumped up nimbly and shouted, "Brother." He clapped his fists and laughed loudly. You guys can't understand how wonderful it feels to regain something you lost. As he spoke, he dashed forward, wanting to grab the lump of flesh that was suspended in the air. Unfortunately, a blood demon stretched out his hand and blocked him without any hesitation. You said it's yours. Call it. Will it respond? The black lion chuckled. You're already an adult. Don't make things difficult for it, okay? The two of them were engaged in a war of words, neither giving way to the other. However, the development of the situation did not change according to their will. Right when their spittle was flying everywhere, the bright red sarcoma hovering above the pool had already begun to float towards the center of the pool. It drew closer to Luo Nan's position. Hey. The black lion could not help but push the blood demon's hand away and jump into the pool. Of course, it wouldn't be too unsightly because there was a floating cushion by the side of the pool. Yes, it was in the shape of a white swan for children or women. The black lion's fat body stepped on it, still holding the swan's neck. The small floating cushion did not sink to the bottom directly, only shaking endlessly. What the hell? Seeing that the black lion was so open, the blood demon could not bear to block him. He allowed the black lion to exert force with his feet, stirring up the water and swaying towards the center of the pool. In the beginning, Luo Nan did not pay attention to the reactions of the people by the pool. Most of his thoughts were still on Niu Gui's side. Retrieving the bright red sarcoma that caused Talker to go berserk was one thing. But soon he was more or less shocked by the actions of the black lion, just like the blood demon. As an extraordinary, the black lion might not be omnipotent, but he still had hundreds and thousands of ways to get to the center of the pool. He had to put on a more dignified appearance. The reason why he acted like an ordinary person to the point of taking the initiative to kill old owls was probably because he wanted to express an attitude of not being an enemy. This included his previous actions, especially taking the initiative to kill old owls, even if it was just a clone body. Speaking of which, Black Lion's previous actions of killing old owls, aside from indicating the special status of extraordinaries, was equivalent to indirectly confirming that this fellow had an extraordinary relationship with old owls. After all, old owls wasn't truly dead. Wang Yong and Tu Gu had the status of bodyguards. It was their duty, so they actually didn't say anything. Several matters piled up together. Luo Nan had to look at the Black Lion in a different light. And the more things were like this, the more questions Luo Nan had. He wanted to obtain answers from the Black Lion. He waved his hand to brush away the beginning of the configuration design and looked straight at the approaching Black Lion. The Black Lion also looked at him. The two looked face to face. From a spectator's perspective, Luo Nan had the advantage. He was in a high position looking down from above. In addition, the recently formed false body of cloud was blurry. It was hard to grasp the details of Luo Nan's gaze. The uncertainties were even higher. Luo Nan himself didn't care who was higher or lower. He just wanted to obtain useful information. The bright red sarcoma arrived a step earlier than the Black Lion. Luo Nan extended his hand, and the dangling tentacles seemed to have a mind of their own. They wrapped around his half-incorporeal arm. The tentacles maintained a pulsating frequency, and they interacted frequently with Luo Nan's false body of cloud. It was as if the tentacles could absorb nutrients from within, or perhaps they could take the things stored inside and seep them into the cloud. The Black Lion raised his head to look over. He didn't conceal his feelings of envy at all. He shouted from afar, "Brother Luo, how did you come up with these tricks?" At nearly the same time, Luo Nan asked him, "When you got this thing, didn't you have an instruction manual over there?" The Black Lion grinned, revealing a mouthful of sharp black and gold teeth. They seemed to flash with light under the dark clouds. "What do you think? Which side?" Luo Nan gave him a glance and shook his head slightly. He wasn't too satisfied with this habitual craftiness. If what followed was this sort of cloudy conversation, then it would be better to seize the moment and settle the matter of Niu Gui. Yes, he reflected on himself for a moment. His explanation wasn't clear enough. Then, Luo Nan pulled back his arms slightly, clasping the still pulsating bright red sarcoma. He extended it out, allowing it to be displayed more clearly before the Black Lion's eyes. "What I'm saying is that even though this reaction furnace is an insincere replica of the wreckage in the entire Earth, there should only be that Li Wei who can produce something like this." Luo Nan spoke halfway when the gazes of the 7 extraordinaries around him focused on his body. There was a clear increase in temperature. Later on, A few of them even had gazes as scorching as fire, practically igniting his false body of cloud. The swimming pool sunk into a strange silence for a time. It was like a boiling solution in a sealed container. No one knew whether it would silently boil away in the end, or whether it would suddenly explode with a loud bang without warning. The black lion sunk into silence at first, maintaining a somewhat stiff smile. But his gaze was extremely lively. He didn't miss a single detail of the pulsating bright red sarcoma in Luo Nan's palm. Nearly 10 seconds passed. Just as someone was about to lose control and speak up for him, the black lion ground his mouth full of golden teeth. He injected a nearly malevolent liveliness into his stiff smiling face. He probably thinks that a headless fly that can't even see the road clearly won't be able to understand the instruction manual. Chapter 1065. A headless fly. Luo Nan repeated in a low voice. His meaning was quite subtle. It was hard to tell if he was mocking or something else, just like his blurred figure face and focus of gaze. In comparison, the bright red sarcoma in Luo Nan's hand, the reaction furnace, was more textured. The pulsation of this reaction furnace in Luo Nan's palm was still discernible with the naked eye. Due to its unique appearance, the young man looked like a murderous demon who had disemboweled and dug out his heart. However, its frequency remained relatively stable, emitting a unique vitality. Luo Nan knew that Li Wei had already sent this replica to the entire world to collect the special compound spores produced by infected mutants. But Luo Nan was still a bit surprised to see this from the jade light. Moreover, Black Lion had openly used it and even changed its use. So he gave a new evaluation. A headless fly. Mr. Black Lion is too modest. At the very least, not everyone can change the use of the mutant parasite that Li Wei split inside. Black Lion's hands were still wrapped around the neck of the swan. His belly was bulging, making the swan's slender neck bend into a very difficult arc. This posture was very laughable. He did his best to maintain a smile, letting the atmosphere wander on the verge of breaking. I've made a fool of myself in front of you, Brother Luo. I borrowed a ready-made mutant to graft. I got this result by accident. It was just a blind cat bumping into a dead mouse. Graft? Luo Nan was deep in thought, but he didn't delve too deeply into it. On the other hand, Black Lion went from a headless fly to a blind cat. Didn't this mean that he had made progress over the years? Black Lion immediately said, Brother Luo, you still haven't told me. What did you rely on to make this toy? Play so beautifully. He just read the instruction manual. Luo Nan temporarily suppressed this ridiculing truth at the bottom of his heart. No matter how ignorant he was of the ways of the world, he could more or less understand the principle of speaking according to the person he met. As for the specific operation, that would depend on his performance on the spot. I probably studied seriously. Luo Nan shook the reaction furnace in his hand and answered. Of course, I need the corresponding train of thought and basic knowledge. Do you want me to explain the division, control, and reorganization of living organisms? The Black Lion let out a long "oh" sound. There were still doubts in his eyes, but he didn't get to the bottom of it. It was as if the previous question and answer had never happened. It seemed that after the initial sharpness, the situation seemed to have returned to the simple level of lacking sincere communication. Because of this, there were a few people who secretly sighed in relief. Around the swimming pool, the pressure cooker that was previously sealed seemed to let out a sizzling sound of steam. The top of the pressure cooker jumped and the inside was boiling. It was temporarily free from the danger of explosion. The funny thing about the world was that some secrets were called open secrets in the circle, but since they were called secrets, there must be a reason for it. If you don't know, it means that you don't belong in this circle. You won't be able to stay in this circle for long. From the looks of things, Luo Nan and Black Lion had probed the edges. They were separated by a thin layer of window paper, but in the end they were not able to pierce through, right? However, Luo Nan's thoughts were different from some people's. He actually didn't mind if he pierced through or not. In any case, ever since he discovered the message his father left behind in the tree hole next to Gear on the north bank, he had firmly nailed Li Wei, this visitor from beyond the heavens, to the position of being absolutely irreconcilable. Nothing could be better than to be able to pierce through this person's disguise and dig out his roots. He didn't expect to be able to do it in one go, but he couldn't shrink back either. A little bit at a time, continuously adding salt, would be able to marinate even the thickest skin and flesh. It was at this time that the blood demon by the side of the swimming pool began to raise his voice in protest. Hey, can you guys take care of non-professionals? It's very tiring for us to be here with our ears perked up. This was a typical gag and the atmosphere continued to relax. Luonan turned his head and smiled at the blood demon. His face was blurry, but his voice and intentions were incomparably clear. Sure. I can talk about it in detail. Around the swimming pool, the atmosphere that had been relaxing suddenly froze. The blood demon was penetrated by at least 2 pairs of gazes. The hairy legs beneath his flowery underpants subconsciously trembled twice, but in the end his face still revealed a smile that said everything was under control. Luonan's words didn't change the intentions of others. His mind stirred slightly and the reactor clasped in his palm clearly swelled. Soon the outer layer of the reactor's skin split open. Oh! It was unknown whether it was intentional or unintentional, but the black lion let out a series of sighs. It ground its sharp black gold teeth out of habit, and its gaze was glued to the newly exposed bright red and complex organizational structure. Since the end of last year, when Luonan made initial contact with the night-level basic colonizing biochemical reactor, researching its internal structure and modification plan became one of Luonan's most important daily assignments. Back in Spring City, Luonan seized the remains of a reactor and broke through Li Wei's distortions and abnormalities in the reactor structure in one fell swoop. Luonan completed the reverse modification and restoration. The reason why he wasn't able to restore it to 100% was mostly due to the limitations of the materials. Luonan understood this. This little thing was already clear in his heart. Now that he was explaining it, he did it with ease. This reactor was originally designed to have 6 standard functional compartments. But right now only the breeding room function remains. I don't know if it was like this when Mr. Li Wei obtained it, or if it was deliberately modified. As Luonan spoke, a large portion of the reactor structure was dissected and peeled off layer by layer, just like a dismantled model that had been made in advance. Only a small area was left in its original state. This was the breeding room he spoke of. Outside the breeding room is some kind of mutated living organism that possesses the function of a collector. Of course, Mr. Black Lion's magically modified version cannot be seen. The general structure is like this. Just as Luonan's voice fell, countless fine blood vessels and nerve structures were pulled out from the deeper layers of the bright red body. They were connected back and forth, basically forming a network. Then layers of skin and flesh were wrapped around the outside. They were like mini slugs glued together. The back of the reactor even showed twitching pulses of nerve impulses. The pulses were transmitted to the many tentacles on the outermost layer, causing them to tremble endlessly in the air. Even though the size of the reactor was a bit small, and the complicated changes in the details of the nerves and blood vessels weren't taken care of by the people who came into contact with it for the first time, the surrounding people were all extraordinaries. They wouldn't miss a single detail that they should see. And because of this, Luonan's series of operations made them unable to believe that this was just a simple imitation model. It couldn't be that he had directly copied Li Wei's design, right? Yes, compared to the reactor itself, the 7 extraordinaries were mostly more interested in Luonan's method of disassembling, assembling, and even producing the tissue structure of a mutated living organism. They had indeed grasped the main point. This was because the method Luonan was using right now had truly just been developed. In the past, he had to rely on the external neuron to form interference waves in order to achieve absolute control over the reactor. What he was doing today was the result of pure handwork. Luonan was able to accomplish this not only because of his experience and understanding of the reactor's usage, but also because of the refinement of the theory of configuration and superconfiguration. He also used the mica structure to carry out deep dissociation, segmentation, and reorganization. Even in the Heavenly Yuan Empire, this was the technical support of a heavenly ladder. And the level was likely to be quite high. Unfortunately, Luonan wasn't particularly familiar with this technical method. He borrowed the reactor to demonstrate, taking the opportunity to increase his proficiency. It was impossible for him to go any deeper. His foot still landed on Li Wei's original design. I just said that this is a sort of collector. It should be used to collect the new mutated components that continue to appear on Earth. Using spores, or genes, isn't strict enough, but it might be a bit more vivid. Luonan didn't go too deep into this. This was the scale he grasped. He just shook his finger once more, allowing the magnets and light hidden within the temporarily constructed vascular neural network to continue to display their effects. The multi-headed slug that had just taken shape suddenly disintegrated and melted. It began to restore its original internal structure. From Li Wei's collector to Mr. Blacklian's transformation hub. Forgive me for not being able to understand the process. It's still very chaotic. Mr. Blacklian? Blacklian suddenly came back to his senses. Ah, Brother Luo is talking about? Does Mr. Blacklian need to explain in detail? No need. I just said that it was just a stroke of luck. Currently, the path of mutated research is still in its barbaric growth phase. Only a few advanced research organizations like Los Angeles City's Clay Laboratory and Sakura City's Ping Trade Experimental Zone have relatively clear and applicable results. I relied on the geographical advantage and a bit of luck to accomplish this. The corner of Blacklian's mouth twitched as he spoke. This accomplished had nothing to do with him now. He didn't expect Luo Nan to return the reactor. Luo Nan really didn't have the intention of returning the reactor to its rightful owner. Although the main function had changed, Luo Nan still discovered a batch of collector from the breeding room of the reactor. Luo Nan was unable to enter deep analysis through the virtual brain system since he wasn't connected to the external neuron. Luo Nan didn't know how many of the advanced formula ingredients Li Wei needed were in there. In any case, he wouldn't be funding the enemy. Since Blacklian was hiding his abilities, Luo Nan didn't need to continue demonstrating. After restoring the reactor, he asked about non-technical matters. Of course, it was still related to Li Wei. I always thought that Li Wei treated this thing as a shady business and did it quite covertly. Now it looks like the situation is a bit more complicated. Mr. Blacklian, are you collaborating with him in research? Research? Researching the puzzle-solving abilities of flies? Blacklian laughed self-deprecatingly and patted his own belly. Actually, I always thought that this was the spoils of war from the Deep Blue World. Chapter 1066. Deep Blue World. This was a sensitive word for Luo Nan. His attention was diverted a bit and he asked, "You've been to the Deep Blue World? How hard can it be?" Blacklion's palm could rub flowers on his belly, but it made him appear more relaxed. His expression of sudden realization was extremely vivid. "Oh right. You came from Xia City. No wonder. Although I can't say that every extraordinary knows about the Deep Blue World, I'm afraid that Ouyang Chen is the only one who is still kept in the dark despite his high status and ranking. He's a pure technical person. His connections are truly the shame of the extraordinary." Luo Nan looked at him very seriously and responded, "You guys are afraid of me." Did Blacklion really think that he didn't know about the messy matters within the Ability User Society and among the extraordinary? Forget it. I was the one who didn't keep my mouth shut. Blacklion decisively gave in. Then he smacked the swan's neck with force, emitting muffled sounds. "So what if you know the location of the Deep Blue World? The Mariana Trench isn't a place you can casually go. Brother, do you really think that as an extraordinary, you can ride this toy and dive 10,000 meters to the bottom of the sea?" Not necessarily. Luo Nan responded simply, but he was deep in thought. What kind of water vapor configuration could resist and even utilize the vile high-pressure environment of the deep sea? Blacklion emphasized, "In the enormous Earth, Poseidon is the only one who can come and go freely without relying on specialized deep-sea ships, including the extraordinary. As for other people, so what if they come to the Deep Blue World for a 7-day tour, a 10-day tour, or a long vacation tour? What they see is what Li Wei wants them to see." The topic was a bit off topic, but the general direction was clearly deeper. So Luo Nan was willing to continue the discussion with Blacklion. "According to what you're saying, doesn't the Deep Blue World become Li Wei's private property? Whatever he says goes. You guys and investors like Old Owls all let him do as he pleases? Old Owls. Hee. Blacklion's attitude was quite disdainful. It was the same attitude as when he had exploded Luo Nan's head with a finger. Old Owls is nothing but a pitiful worm with his balls pinched. As time wears on, he has less and less strength to fight back. Oh. Otherwise, why do you think he would come to such a small trade fair?" Li Wei didn't even need to say anything. It was just Wang Yu's promise that she would draw out the in-progress results of the Bloodline project in advance to help him extend his life. That's why he came over eagerly for the Distortion Technology Exchange Conference. In fact, those who are familiar with him know that Old Els has never been interested in distortion technology. He is happy to use it to earn money, but he would never want to bet his future on it. The amount of information contained in these words was quite large. Luo Nan digested it as he blurted out a question. He doesn't like mutants. Why? What else can it be? Because of his greed, he has always wanted to take the orthodox path, and because he believes that only by studying the evolution of supernatural abilities step by step can he truly gain a brand new life so that his ugly, rotten, stinky skin can regain its youth. The Black Lion freed his hand and gestured with his thumb, index, and middle fingers. Then he pressed his thumb back. It's a pity that this path came to an end a long time ago. He used to be a fork in the road. This path is no longer popular. At least it's not mainstream now. 3 forks. Luo Nan thought for a moment. One is orthodox evolution. The other is mutant technology. What's the last one? It's the Bloodline Project. The Apocalypse Laboratory is currently pushing hard. Who knows how many old dogs are sticking out their tongues right now, waiting to lick their bones to quench their cravings. The Black Lion still didn't hold back with his words, but he still maintained respect for Luo Nan. Speaking of which, this isn't really suitable for a long chat. How about we go get a cup of coffee? Adding a bit of other liquid ingredients to this fake body seems pretty good. Luo Nan could see that the Black Lion was trying to regain the initiative in the conversation. For this reason he spoke of all sorts of dark secrets, not even bothering to beat around the bush. Of course he probably really did have the habit of selling people out. It was also possible that these things weren't considered to be amazing secrets within the circle of extraordinaries. Sure. It's good to go replenish its water. Luo Nan agreed quite straightforwardly. Luo Nan didn't mind temporarily relinquishing control, as long as the other brought out enough information for the price. He really wanted to observe the reactions of the others up close. He wanted to see Li Wei's position and influence in the hearts of these extraordinaries. Luo Nan put away the reaction furnace as he spoke. He tossed Niu Gui into the middle of the swimming pool and turned around to float back to where Blood Demon and Wan Luhua were. Luo Nan's position. Black Lion gave up on the White Swan in a straightforward and efficient manner. He leapt onto the shore of the pool, sticking out his belly and his face to play host. The level of the jadeite light could be seen at this moment. Even though not every management and service staff possessed the ability to view supernatural phenomena as ordinary, there was always a need for customers. There were always enough people. A group of strictly trained service staff were already in place while Luo Nan and Black Lion were conversing in the center of the pool. Now they were serving drinks, beverages, and refreshments like flowing water. These esteemed guests had to be satisfied. At the very least, they couldn't find any mistakes. However, no one would take these refreshments seriously. Aside from Blood Demon and Wan Luhua, who had a rough idea of what was going on and could be ignored for the time being, everyone else had their own plans. Black Lion had finally managed to invite Luo Nan back with great difficulty. If they didn't probe the thoughts of this young and headstrong expert now, when would they be able to do so? Well, directly probing wouldn't be appropriate, so they would chat first. It just so happened that the 3 forks in the path of the evolution of extraordinary powers were never outdated topics among the upper echelons. Everyone had something to say more or less. Luo Nan's knowledge was greatly broadened. Combining the information from various parties, he was able to understand that evolution, mutation, and bloodline were the 3 most important research directions that revolved around the evolution of life and extraordinary powers in the last 20 to 30 years. Among them, evolution was to use normal people and metahumans as a frame of reference. With genetic science as the foundation, they researched and created an ability matching and point-adding route, in an attempt to deduce the perfect template for human superpowers so that normal people could make the leap to metahumans and continue to evolve. This research path was once flourishing. Many people benefited from it. There were even some people present who obtained inspiration during that stage, allowing them to ascend to the level of extraordinary in one fell swoop. Master Wan rose up during that time. Blood Demon directly pointed out his name. "Aren't you?" Wan Luhua responded with a question. "I'm Wild Fox Zen." Blood Demon laughed, but he didn't deny it outright. "I fattened up quite a bit that time. My fleshly body." Of course, more of it collapsed. Luo Nan listened to them talk about old times. He didn't interrupt. He listened with great interest. During this time, Luonen felt as if Wan Liahua's gaze had shifted a bit more to his body. Chapter 1067. Most of the Transcendents present sighed when they talked about the old days of that era. According to them, the various powers of the inner world were mostly supporters of the research on the evolutionary route. They had invested a lot in it, but they had also profited greatly. However, in the mid to late 80s, this research route continuously ran into problems. It was said that the accumulation of genetic engineering was insufficient, and there were problems with the design of the key projects. Their actions were also too radical, which led to many serious accidents. It even led to the loss of a few transcendent seeds with great prospects. This caused the relevant research organizations to suffer greatly, and the investors gradually became more conservative. As for the inner world, there were even serious conflicts because of this. The gratitude and grudges within were difficult to describe in detail. The evolutionary route fell into a stagnation period and there were some setbacks. This was actually a very normal thing in the process of scientific research. The problem was that at that stage a powerful substitute had appeared. The archetype format. Once the archetype format theory came out, Deep Blue was established and outshone the others in the relevant fields. Capital and resources tended to be concentrated, and under this situation the evolutionary route suffered the most painful blow. Project Deep Blue was indeed a monster with an enormous appetite. When the project first started, it practically swept away all the original research organizations and talents of the evolutionary route. Some of the research results were also used by Deep Blue, and it gradually turned into a path of human body strengthening and modification, which was the prerequisite for burners. If not for this and they really had to start from scratch, it would have been very difficult for Project Deep Blue to produce such mature and complete results as burners and Deep Blue platform in a short 3 to 5 years. All this time, the inner world had the custom of saying no to modified humans, and there was a lot of rejection towards burners. Apart from the sense of superiority from self-awakening, the experience of being possessed was also one of the reasons. Of course, there was also the godly operation of saying that burners were not modified humans and swallowing the words that had been spat out. That was a matter of another level. Speaking of this, Black Lion was still trying to sell old elves for a good price. Old elves hated this to no end. In the 70s and 80s, Old elves had always been an important investor in this field. Under his leadership, when the LCRF was first established, he took out a lot of resources and invested them, but in the end it almost went to waste. The fact that the Deep Blue project was able to receive $1 trillion investment when it was first established has nothing to do with the investors' vision. Instead, it's largely because the investors are seeking to prevent losses. The Blood Demon concluded simply, "It's like making a wedding dress for someone else. But now aren't they still shouting how nice?" Black Lion didn't respond to this topic. He just faced Luonan and said, "Forgive me for speaking bluntly. It doesn't matter if it's the archetype format or formatting theory. In that period of time, it could be said that standard conceptual design defeated basic research. Evolution is basically an extension of the original technical route. It seems stable, but in fact there is still a lack of accumulation. Most of the time I can't see any difference from the basic research of the past. The lack of surprises in the capital market was why the Deep Blue project had replaced it with the fresh and feasible archetype format theory. But up until now, not a single burner has been able to enter the domain of transcendence. The Tao is the pinnacle and their accomplishments are locked. And that's because they haven't been able to explore the foundational level and make the most fundamental changes. Brother, if you can make formatting theory sink even further and come up with a feasible framework at the genetic level, it would be a great achievement. There was the smell of a serious discussion. Luonan didn't want to get involved in academic discussions, but he didn't want to stray too far from the topic. He gave a slight nod, accepting Black Lion's opinion. Soon he brought the topic back. According to what you're saying, the mutation and bloodline projects are very much in line with the logic of capital? That's right. Black Lion spoke with great confidence. Look, the basic purpose of the aberration technology is to adapt and correct the irreversible effects of aberrations. As long as we're still surrounded by aberrations, as long as the aberration infection isn't eliminated, this research must continue. This is a necessity and there's a huge market for it. As for the Bloodline project, it was personally led by Li Wei. It's the most mysterious and high-end project. There's even a saying that it's a reverse decryption route. It's a reference to some existing perfect template to extract golden stem cells. The surrounding airflow was a bit sluggish, but it was still within an acceptable range. Luonan laughed. Perfect template? What perfect template? Plus, does this have anything to do with templates? Luonan didn't continue to speak after a few mocking words. He didn't continue the conversation either. He just swept his gaze over to Tugu before returning to the domain of mutation. You just said that mutation research is very profitable in the market? Of course. Plus, the closer the research target is to people, the more money there is. It can't be infection prevention and control, right? Hee. Brother, why do you ask when you already know the answer? You've seen the materials in Clay's laboratory. I don't need to remind you. Right now, this controllable mutation technology is becoming more and more popular in the investment circle. It used to be deep underwater, but looking at it now, it's like a deep water bomb. Perhaps a large oil field will be blown up. Luonan had a bad feeling when he heard Black Lion's explanation. The hotter this domain is, the more it proves. The mutation infection has already gone out of control. Black Lion rapped the table with his thick knuckles, causing the water in the cup to ripple. I don't need to say anything. The area I'm in has never been good. All sorts of vagrant laws have been rolled out in the other territories. They're pretty much a complete mess. The most direct problem is that the mutation infection has gone through several generations of transmission and mutation. The infected can no longer be simply described as a monster that has gone berserk. The transmission power hasn't decreased, and statistics have become even more difficult. No one can clearly calculate this mess. Not to mention that there are all sorts of people and powers adding fuel to the fire. The corresponding acceptance rate is increasing without end. The eastern part of the old continent is a conservative region. They have always severely rejected problems involving genetic pollution. You can't use your way of thinking to expand to the entire world. For the sake of expanding the mutation infection, a special orgy is being held. Do you want to know more about it? In many cities of the new continent, if a young person hasn't participated in this sort of party, then they're considered to be behind the times. Also, let's not talk about anything else. There are quite a few mutation-infected people on this ship. A large number of high-level bodyguards have already undergone body modification or mutation modulation. Otherwise, it would be hard for them to even find a job. This is an open secret of high society. Black Lion talked without end. Evidence emerged one after another. Actually, Luonan had heard Peony talk about these things before. It wasn't anything new and he wasn't particularly surprised. He just muttered to himself. Black Lion finally concluded, the objective situation is like this. Everyone understands it, but they don't make it public. Everyone has their own plans. The problem is that the subjective thoughts displayed from this are the most crucial. In the minds of those who approve of this trend, the mutation can already be viewed as another kind of awakening. Before Black Lion could finish his summary, at least 3 extraordinaries in the surroundings let out cold snorts or sneers. Black Lion acted as if he didn't hear anything. He continued to add, it's not just those idiots who join in the fun and chase after fashion. In fact, this is becoming more and more like a new consensus in the capital circles, in a considerable portion of the ruling circles, and even in some circles of the inner world. Chapter 1068. Black Lion was eloquent with his words. He jumped to old airs in an instant when he spoke of distortion. The old man is stubborn on this point. You guys understand the mind of an old man. Even though distortion is the most likely way to make a lot of money, and it is an irresistible trend, he still has some reservations. He rejects it greatly and doesn't trust this train of thought. So you don't find him pleasing to the eye. Blood Demon sneered as he forcefully interrupted, distortion is an awakening. You're the most enthusiastic advocate of this sort of laughable saying, right? That's where you're wrong. No matter what other places are like, the Ping Trade Experimental Zone in Banqing is still fine. Black Africa, where I'm from, and the subcontinent of the old continent are all obvious living experiment sites. In the traditional research system, they have their own unique value. The problem is that the core technology will always be hard to grasp in our hands. Distortion technology is the same. If the trend is conservative and the status quo is maintained, it won't be too bad for us rentiers. But if the trend is radical and the experimental field loses its uniqueness, its value will be weakened, and there will be no production of technology. Where will I get my money from? So not only do I not advocate, I deliberately keep a low profile. This is my basic stance. I can't be wrong at all. Blood Demon raised his eyebrows. He still wanted to bicker with Black Lion, but Luo Nan took a step ahead and said, "We can discuss Mr. Black Lion's position later. However, Old Owls is a big capitalist. He doesn't have a technical background. What is the core of his insistence? Is it the intuition of surpassing technical personnel, or is it purely conservative?" Actually, these words were not directed at Black Lion. Instead, he looked at Tu Gu and Wang Yong. Those two certainly wouldn't answer. Luonan just wanted to see their reactions. Unfortunately, the poker faces behind the two sunglasses were emotionless faces. In the end, Black Lion took over the conversation. The old man really is conservative in thinking on this point. He has said more than once that distortion technology is too chaotic. It's hard to end things after a good start. Then I really have to look at him in a different light. Luo Nan followed up with a question, "What's Li Wei's stance on distortion technology?" He himself has never commented on the distortion technology in public. However, many of the newest gene editing technologies in the distortion laboratory are products of the Bloodline project. What do you think his stance is? Oh, understandable. Luonan laughed. If the mutated infection on Earth did not continue to spread, where would Li Wei get the ingredients for the advanced formula? Regardless of the attitude of the key personnel, it had to be admitted that what the Black Lion said was indeed the reality. But when it came out of his mouth, it tasted different. Before he could think it through, Black Lion's topic had already piqued the interest of the others. The extraordinaries present had all come from an era where the path of evolution had flourished and was soon to be severed. They had also spent half their lives competing against aberrations. They had the right to speak about the battle of paths and the changes in the situation. However, their perspective was not from an economic or social point of view. Instead, they were looking at something more direct and pure. As Constance said, evolutionary awakening or the so-called aberration awakening, to determine which is more correct, in the end we have to return to the most core argument. What triggered the era of distortion and allowed the ability users to step onto the stage of history? If it's the aberration itself, then there's no reason to resist it. But if it's another factor, then we need to carefully consider it. Blood Demon clenched his fist in front of Constance's hood. The strength of his palm and fingers clenched together actually stirred the air, emitting a buzzing, trembling sound. We still haven't found the X factor. However, I still don't believe that this kind of intense surging supernatural power, which I can use like a finger, is the creation of a patchwork of deranged genes. I'd rather set my sights on the abyssal region for the same reason. At the very least, my fleshly body can feel and use that place. Blood Demon cast his gaze at Wan Luhua as he spoke. She responded with a smile. In the initial stages of research, introducing large amounts of new variables will only cause more trouble. Wan Luhua's answer was even simpler, but the new variables she spoke of were clearly referring to the aberration technology and the corresponding foreign genes. Her attitude was extremely clear. Comparatively speaking, Constance and the Star Shaman had a bit more uncertainty in their thinking, but this was limited to theoretical discussions. Luo Nan listened to their discussion and debate, and he soon came to a clear understanding. In this domain, the extraordinaries who already had a first-mover advantage took the conservative path of evolution. They used their own extraordinary talent to dig out their own potential. They were all on high alert toward the infiltration and influence of the mutated genes. Even the Black Lion, who benefited from the aberration technology, had a more pure and rational cultivation. However, although there were no transcendents present, there were still a portion of them who were particularly unrestrained. As for who they were, it was easy to tell. Basically, the existences in the sequence of cubes were more dangerous, especially those who were nomads in the wilderness. For example, Rabi the clown who once fought the High Lord of Secret Contract was a typical mutant who was sometimes clear-headed. There was also Poseidon, who was the root of the mutants. Among them, Black Lion was considered a typical conservative. Luo Nan was gathering and digesting information, but some people felt that he had been silent for too long. The Star Shaman's debate had failed, so he suddenly turned to ask, "What do you think, Professor Luo?" Speaking of which, Professor Luo had almost single-handedly reversed the direction of psychic research. Shouldn't he be the one to take responsibility for this sort of problem? To the side, Blood Demon took a sip of his drink. "Tisde. This orange juice is sour." Luo Nan blinked. Did he run into the grudges of the academic world? According to what the star shaman had said, reversing the direction of psychic research was most likely referring to the classical theoretical framework of 3 levels, 1 region and 1 domain that was overthrown by the prison theory. This kind of theoretical system was certainly the conclusion of an authoritative master of the psychic side. With the ranking of psychic transcendence, it was possible that the star shaman and even the death shaman had contributed to this. This was normal. Frankly speaking, Luo Nan was considered an amateur when it came to aberration technology. But he had a unique advantage when compared to others. He had once stayed in the environment of the relay station, and the relay station was a typical environment in the light concealment star system that had suffered from the pollution of sin poison. Sin poison and aberration were fundamentally different. Aberration mainly came through the pollution of foreign genes. Sin poison came through more complex changes that might involve fundamental laws. It carried out a more comprehensive influence. But the external phenomena and effects of the two could be compared to each other. At the very least, they both affected the foundation of the existence of life. This was especially true when it came to racial evolution and cultivation. With the example of the Heavenly Yuan Empire as a precedent, Luo Nan knew that aberrations could occur at any time, producing complex and unstable genomes. This was a terrible thing for the cultivation of a population. Even with the accumulation of the Heavenly Yuan Empire, they had to spend an enormous amount of manpower and material resources to endlessly modify their foundational techniques in order to adapt. But the frequency of changes grew faster and faster since Sin Calamity began. This was definitely not a good sign. Liang Lu had also said that if the situation in the light concealment star system continued for another 1,000 years, it was very likely that there would only be a group of species that preserved the glorious memories of the Heavenly Yuan Empire, but they were completely different from their ancestors. Forgive Luo Nan for his conservative thinking. This sort of situation was ultimately not good. Chapter 1069. This was Luo Nan's basic line of thought. However, he had never systematically researched the current mutation technology, nor had he ever thought deeply about what the most reasonable evolutionary path for the human population should be. Therefore, he still held back a bit in his speech. If the current mutation technology is based on the widespread adoption of foreign genes as a basic starting point, carrying out reconstruction, or simply seeking to mutate after infection, then I feel that we shouldn't use the word awakening. It will cause misunderstandings. To put it bluntly, genetic modification or recombination are both more appropriate. However, if it really is an example that I've seen before, then mutation is still the most appropriate word. It allows one to understand the high degree of uncertainty of foreign genetic contamination and the consequences of mutation. There's no need to confuse other concepts. Star Shaman laughed when he heard this. Professor Luo's way of speaking is a bit like a spokesperson. It's watertight, but it lacks the drive to subvert tradition from earlier. Actually, I'm quite looking forward to the dominant force of someone other than myself. Luo Nan looked at this pretty boy extraordinary, ignoring the obvious mockery and hidden stabs in Star Shaman's words. Luo Nan had experienced the relay station and had come into contact with the silhouette of the Heavenly Yuan Empire's struggle in the Hongguang system. He was solemn and serious when it came to such topics. He would not argue with others with his emotions. He maintained a calm attitude and organized his thoughts. He responded in a manner that was neither fast nor slow. The topic of evolution is far too big, especially when it is magnified to the level of a population. It's not wrong to consider a broader path of choice. It's fine to discuss the angle of entry and the direction of the future. It's just that one must be more cautious than the last step. I very much agree with Ms. Wan's words on this point. The research is still in its initial stages. The structure of the body has yet to be completely explored and its marvels exhausted. Rashly introducing external factors will only make matters more complicated. For me, if I want to complete a work, I'll need to make a large system before the core design and train of thought is clear and refined. I won't rule out the possibility of success, but that's a standard gamble of probability. One general achieves success on the bones of 10,000 people, is an optimistic estimate. Therefore, first solidify basic research step by step from simple to complex, obtain a method theory and then guide practice. This path is a bit old, but it's still more realistic, right? The Star Shaman frowned. He was quite surprised that Luo Nan, who had been willful and unbridled, would be so steady and conservative when discussing this topic. He wanted to argue, but his status as an extraordinary and his basic intellect still made him relatively rational in the end. He just shook his head slightly. The current situation is that even if the extraordinary from back then didn't have the ability to do so, they wouldn't have been able to do so. The evolutionary path also had a considerable proportion of people who used the template of extraordinaries to reverse engineer it. On this point, there is no difference between evolution, mutation, and bloodline. Can basic research derive supernatural powers from traditional basic research? Blood Demon jumped out to object before Luo Nan could say anything. Xianxia, you're being unkind. Can the research before World War III and the research after World War III be the same? Have you broken the definition of basic research? Wan Luhua also said, the basic research and theories regarding supernatural powers have always been enriching. The research on the X factor of the external environment, the research on the internal genes, and also the research on aberrations. It's more appropriate to look at it in a comprehensive manner. They are indeed influencing each other. This was a fair statement. Wan Luhua paused for a moment before smiling once more. I feel that the concept of configuration that Mr. Luo proposed on the basis of formatting theory is quite good. Under special circumstances, the adaptability and adjustment of the body and mind must be taken into consideration. A completely new life structure needs to be sufficiently coordinated with the internal and external environment. My school calls this a secret contract, while Mr. Luo calls it configuration. Constance followed up with her words. This is too rough. Black Lion is completely correct in saying that it's a concept design. Blood Demon chuckled. That's why we need to search for the details and rules behind the roughness. From the looks of things, Brother Luo has walked to the forefront. He's at least in the first echelon. He's much more reliable than aberrations. I don't deny it. Constance actually expressed her approval, catching many people off guard. No one knew what kind of expression Constance had under her hood, but her voice was exceptionally calm. Actually, I like the cage theory a bit more. It can open up an unprecedented train of thought. These people seem to be talking about matters on the genetic level when they talk about evolution. But clearly, the development of the mental side is much less restricted. The powerful ego of ability users and the introduction of the mental plane are destined to be impossible to rely solely on the research of the objective world. The existence of the ego and the mental world are equally important. It's better to have new subversive theories added to the mix than a pool of stagnant water. The star shaman had one hand on his hip. He had a bitter smile on his face. Clearly, Constance's stabbing in the back wasn't light. However, with these words, the topic shifted to the mental side and the fleshly side. There was absolutely no need to worry about awkward silence in this field that involved the direction of human evolution and the fundamentals of cultivation. But this way, the sensitive topic that had nearly stabbed Li Wei in the face was unconsciously dispelled. Luo Nan glanced over and saw Black Lion rubbing his belly with a grin. Luo Nan didn't mind this at all. In fact, listening to these extraordinaries discuss whether the fleshly side or the mental side was more suitable for conducting pilot research had stirred up his thoughts. He couldn't help but think of the vicious environment of the relay station. From what Luo Nan had seen in reality, it could be said that the fleshly foundation was more stable than the mental plane. Under the vile environment of the light concealment galaxy, people practically didn't have the leeway to release their soul's strength. Even if they could release their soul's strength, they needed to be extremely cautious and possess a corresponding medium. In this way, the glorious achievements of the related fields suffered a destructive blow. Even those existences on the pure mental plane, like the magnetite mica jellyfish, were tyrannical enough to survive in the vicious environment. They still needed to borrow a material medium like water vapor and the like. A medium? Did he make a mistake earlier? A light flashed and Luo Nan's telepathic thoughts subconsciously swept through the clouds in the sky. Then he clapped his hands, drawing everyone's attention. Brother Luo Nan? Black Lion turned his eyes over. Do you have any brilliant ideas? Of course, Luo Nan couldn't say that he had been lost in thought just now and had suddenly broken through an important mental checkpoint for restoring the magnetite mica jellyfish. He just laughed and shook his head, but everyone else was staring at him. He couldn't just let this pass. He muttered to himself for a moment, then said, I'm just thinking that the things we've discussed are a bit more general and the construction elements are a bit less detailed. This only proves that our overall understanding is far too lacking. It's not just about ourselves but also the present. including the future environment. As he spoke, he thought of Her Majesty Empress Wu's judgment that the mental side had no future. He also thought of Liang Lu's cautious and meticulous attitude when it came to the lamination interference technology. Luonan had a feeling in his heart, and this led to the next proposition. I heard you guys talk about the X factor. Is it referring to the conditions that ability users have suddenly produced since the era of distortion? Blood Demon rubbed his chin. This suddenly is quite intelligent. Suddenly rising. Suddenly falling. Suddenly changing. Luonan repeated the word, suddenly, several times. It was impossible to express his current feelings otherwise. Then will this condition be maintained in the future? Will it produce new changes? If it will, what will cause this change? Will it be controllable or uncontrollable? Just thinking about it gives me a headache. Actually, Luonan wasn't having a headache. It was just a sudden pessimism. Chapter 1070. His experience at the relay station made Luonan suddenly feel. Even if the aberration was just a little brother compared to the sinful poison, if the situation were to continue developing like this, Earth would not have the accumulation of the Heavenly Yuan Empire. The Heavenly Yuan Empire would probably be the terminally ill first. The most infuriating thing was that there were still people fanning the flames behind the scenes, intentionally or unintentionally misleading. That's right, he was referring to Li Wei. Luonan believed in the authenticity of the information his father took great pains to leave behind. According to that explanation, that fellow Li Wei, it was outsider. If he made a reasonable inference, then perhaps Liang Lu's Heavenly Yuan Empire, the Star Alliance, and other advanced civilizations had a high degree of connection. Let's not talk about how that fellow came to Earth. Just by looking at his background and knowledge, it was impossible for him to not know the problems that existed in the research of supernatural powers on Earth. And everything he did, his attitude was obvious. That fellow harbored ulterior motives. Luonan tossed out a new proposition, then he no longer participated in the discussion. He sat quietly in his chair. His gaze and mental senses naturally flowed around him, gradually expanding from the heated discussion area to the vast expanse of the sea and sky. From his close-up perspective hanging in midair, the jadeite light that carried them was like a city of steel. It rampaged across the ocean, cleaving apart the clouds and turbid waves. It was full of vigor. Perhaps this was the attitude of the extraordinaries before his eyes. These people who stood at the apex of life on Earth were passionately discussing. Even though they were perplexed about the present and the future, they had iron wills built upon powerful egos. They were confident that they could conquer all unknowns. But if they were to raise their point of view a bit higher, allowing their field of view to cover several thousand square kilometers of the sea, covering the vast Pacific Ocean, covering the entire Earth, covering the universe that simply could not be covered, what did the jadeite light and the people on it count for? Luonan was a bit regretful at this time. During his time at the relay station, he didn't find the time to study the basic general knowledge of the Heavenly Yuan Empire. He lacked an understanding of the development context of this high civilization. Otherwise, perhaps he could start a class or something. Luonan didn't know how the future would develop. He also believed that even if they encountered trouble, they could still struggle with their lives. Just like the Heavenly Yuan Empire, even if they had fallen into the destructive process of the world of calamity, they could still struggle with all their might. However, it still required an advanced civilization. It needed to be established on the basis of a complete worldview of everything in the universe and a perfect theory of population evolution. If there were really unexpected changes in the future and the Earth was still as primitive as it was now, then there was really no hope. Maybe something should be done. At the very least, they couldn't let Li Wei, the outsider, use his evil thoughts to carve the progress of Earth's civilization. But what should he do? Luonan calculated seriously for a moment, and then he suddenly became stupefied. Then he laughed in spite of himself. What's going on? He hadn't even solved his own problems, so why did he have to take on such a strange sense of responsibility? Brother Luonan? Black Lion keenly sensed the change in mood. Luonan waved his hand, but the sudden thought just now had left a mark on his heart. It wasn't easy to erase it cleanly in a short amount of time. As time passed, the sky darkened bit by bit. Even the altitude of 10,000 meters in the sky began to be gradually dyed with a deep color. Abner looked at his watch. It was already 7 o'clock in the evening in the East and West Districts 12. There was only an hour left before the highly anticipated auction. and right now he was still on a temporary flight route to the venue. The roar of the plane's engine couldn't cover the sound of footsteps behind him. The Secretary General of Headquarters, Romanus, was in the prime of his life. He walked behind Abner and placed a flexible e-ink screen filled with words on the desk in front of him. President, this is the revised agenda. Please take a look. The Round Table Conference, where the top experts of the world gathered to discuss matters, was undoubtedly of an extremely high standard. Therefore, as the host headquarters of the Ability User Society always followed the regular process of organizing and reporting the agenda. They deliberated over the additions and subtractions, preparing to distribute the agenda to all the participants in order to ensure that the agenda was impeccable during the discussion. But the agenda hadn't even been released yet, let alone distributed and notified. This could only prove that this sort of formality was practically broken. Abner didn't say anything, but he also didn't look at the relevant details. At this time, the projector on his desk displayed a few contents. It was the identification criteria they had determined earlier on for Gong Qi's murder. After looking over and over again, Abner had long since memorized them like the back of his hand. Number 1, an electromagnetic ability user. Number 2, an extraordinary. Number 3, the micromanipulation ability of the power of the abyss region. Number 4, the ability to burn and absorb flesh and blood. Number 5, the ability to assemble and manufacture machinery. Number 6, the ability to conceal and teleport. Number 7, an ape-like creature. In the previously hastily held identification meeting, no matter what everyone's judgment was, the compatibility between the Mr. Mo and Luo Nan combination and this criterion was announced to be 7 out of 10, except for the electromagnetic ability. And now, with the support of the newest information, the so-called Mr. Mo could practically be erased. There was only one Luo Nan. The compatibility criteria was already 7 out of 10. If he, the president of headquarters, was a bit more frivolous, he could already say things like, if Luo Nan didn't do this to Gong Qi, I'll eat shit on a live broadcast. The problem was that the clearer it was, the more troublesome it was. Abner didn't show it on the outside, but his head was getting more and more painful. He never expected things to turn out like this when he proposed to adjourn the meeting that day. During the meeting, Ouyang Qin and Her Majesty Empress Wu had a clear and decisive attitude. It made many extraordinaries and various powers, who were used to the peaceful atmosphere of the 90s, instinctively shrink back. This was actually within the scope of Abner's considerations. He even thought of using this opportunity to eliminate a few disobedient people. However, Mr. Mo and Luo Nan's subsequent exposure of the alternate space of his own accord disrupted this rhythm. With concrete benefits placed before their eyes, the contradiction between the Apocalypse Laboratory headed by Li Wei and the powerful people of the inner world emerged a bit. There were also the complex demands of the Archons, who ruled over political power and capital. Back then he proposed to adjourn the meeting in order to better connect the two sides. He wanted to dissolve a portion and highlight a portion. He wanted to focus the contradiction onto Luo Nan to achieve an ideal result. But he never expected it at the time. It was impossible for him to imagine that Luo Nan, after a few dozen hours of silence, would go on a high-profile path from STEM City. He would broadcast live on the beach, go straight to the cruise ship and fight head-on with extraordinaries. It seemed that Luo Nan had revealed even more flaws, making it easier for people to focus the related crimes and contradictions onto him. However, the influence of this young man rapidly soared from these straightforward and sharp actions. He was like a weight that increased in weight. He wantonly played with the scales of the human heart. Abner's breathing became a bit heavier. The light yellow beard by his lips trembled slightly. He composed himself and turned his gaze to the flexible e-ink screen. However, he didn't look at it in detail. He just asked, "Did Connie send any new information back?" Chapter 1071. "Not yet," Romanus answered very simply. Abner didn't say anything. He just operated a bit in the projection area. He pulled out the intelligence information that Constans had personally organized. Constans made a new round of comparisons between Luo Nan and the 7 criteria for murdering Gong Qi. However, the focus wasn't on the newly confirmed electromagnetic ability. Instead, it was the 6th point, the ability to conceal and teleport. Constans referred to Luo Nan's fight with Tu Gu and Wang Yong, the 2 extraordinaries. He pointed out that Luo Nan's core method of reversing or controlling the situation was the technique of the space-time domain. It could be said that this method was no longer something that could be effectively covered by words like technique. Constan's original words were, "We just need to verify Luo Nan's level in controlling the space-time domain in his fleshly state. Unless one has the determination to fight to the death, a meticulous plan, a loss of face, and a disregard for the losses, the chances of killing Luo Nan are extremely small. The difficulty exceeds 95% for extraordinaries. There were less than 100 extraordinaries in the entire world." In other words, Constance had placed Luo Nan among the top few in the world when it came to judging criteria of difficulty to kill. Perhaps even Abner wasn't among them. Of course, Constance made the premise very clear. He had yet to completely verify how Luo Nan was able to operate the space-time domain while carrying a skeletal fleshly body. Perhaps Luo Nan was the next Gongqi? The entire inner world cried out in surprise when Gongqi displayed the extraordinary ability of void shift back in the day. This was an undying godly technique. But in reality this was just a godly technique on the soul level. Once the fleshly body was shackled it would fall by several levels. Now Gongqi was dead. He died by Luo Nan's hands. It was quite ironic when he thought about it. Abner thought about Gongqi and thought about Jin Tong. The deaths of two extraordinaries in less than a year were inextricably linked to Luo Nan. And these two extraordinary lives had truly verified Luo Nan's extraordinary lethality. One for offense and one for defense. Two hard poles crossed here. Even if there were all sorts of subtle joints, even if they couldn't reach the theoretical pinnacle, so what? A battle record was a battle record. No one could deny it. Abner sighed again. He made corresponding adjustments to Luo Nan's position in his heart. Only then did he look at the flexible e-ink screen on the table. His eyes and fingers swept across it at the same time. Let's change the time first. Let's tentatively set it at 10. Romanus, who was behind him, replied simply, "Okay." Initially, they had set the round table conference to be held at 8 o'clock in the evening. Yes, it coincided with the auction. For some of the participants, it was very unfriendly, it was practically making things difficult for them. That was the truth. However, as the live broadcast on T-City's beach continued to ferment, an unconfirmed horizontal line was marked under the meeting time. The necessary part of the meeting notice had been postponed again and again. Now it was finally time to change it completely. There was no other way. As the organizers of the conference, they needed to take Luo Nan's thoughts into consideration. He also needed to observe and wait for the inevitable variables brought about by Luo Nan to be more exposed. As for tentative, it meant that he could postpone it further. Abner swiped his finger downwards as if he was reading seriously, but most of his energy was focused on the conversation with his secretary. Suddenly he brought up another topic. "What do you think Lord's secret contract is doing?" Romanus maintained his silence this time. Abner's finger finally stopped on the third item on the agenda. According to the current arrangement of the agenda, the first two items were to continue the contents of the last identification meeting, to clearly identify Gongqi's murderer. The second item was to discuss and decide on how to deal with the murderer. However, this was not a simple identification meeting. It was a high-level conference that had been thoroughly prepared. Even if it was just a gesture, the important participants had to have the right to know and the core participants had the right to propose and deliberate on the agenda. Abner sent a draft agenda to the leaders of the three major secret orders, high-level representatives like Director Mao, and some powerful local powers leaders. He asked the other party to propose amendments. This was the process of communicating, discussing, compromising, and even making peace before the meeting. It was the most important part of a large-scale conference. There was no other. The responses from all sides were basically in line with expectations, except for the eye of the secret contract. What Abner said here was twofold. One was naturally the movements of Blood Demon and Wan Luhua. The actions of these two were open and above board, but they brought about undercurrents on a deeper level. They set off an enormous maelstrom that was hard to see with the naked eye. Everyone knew that Blood Demon and Lord's secret contract had a deep friendship. As for Wan Luhua, she was tantamount to being the spokesperson of the Eye of Secret Contract. The two were advancing and retreating together with Luo Nan in a public setting. The meaning behind this was obvious. The Eye of Secret Contract. Abner's finger gently rubbed against the flexible screen, causing the text in that area to slightly warp and glow, reporting the results of the observation and research of the Abyss region, 2086 to 2096, and some deductions. That was the other side of the story. The Eye of Secret contract really did add a topic, an outline, and a main point. Abner read it seriously, but the more he did so, the more his head hurt. That self-proclaimed future teacher of the old fellow was going to declare his existence. His field of vision shook a bit. Abner's finger steadily pressed against the flexible e-ink screen. He didn't move, but the entire plane moved. At the same time, the light that seeped in was clearly dimmer. A large amount of clouds swept past outside the porthole, intensifying the trembling of the plane. Romanus frowned slightly and soon received the report from the pilot. He relayed the report as it was. We've encountered high-altitude turbulence. We've entered the clouds to temporarily avoid it. We also need to lower our altitude. We've already contacted the Tower of the Jade Light. We don't need their nonsense. Abner's brows furrowed. Some emotions churned within him. Actually, this had nothing to do with the pilot. It was just that he was able to sense some special information from this sudden jolt and the nothingness of the clouds that struck the plane. It wasn't just him. Romanus, the two of spades who made it onto the Deck magazine rankings for the first time, wouldn't miss out on this either. The two extraordinaries suddenly went silent for a few seconds. Only when the plane stabilized did they start talking again. Abner asked, "How far away are we from the Jade Light?" "Approximately 20 nautical miles. Do you have an estimate of the cloud cover?" "The diameter should be around 300 to 500 kilometers. You've hidden it really well." Romanus gave a simple response, "Yes." As the plane entered the clouds, the two extraordinaries sensed the movement of a certain person's energy within this region. To be more precise, they had only just sensed it. A power layout that caused one's heart to palpitate was arranged within the 1,000-mile cloud layer. It nurtured a marvelous structure that no one could understand. The most inexplicable thing was that it was actually so reserved and deep. "I've never seen it before. Is it Luonan?" Romanus hesitated for a moment before responding, "Perhaps." Chapter 1072. In the end, Abner didn't receive any updates from Constance on the plane. However, when his plane landed on the top deck of the Jade Light, Constance met him at the docking bridge. She brought him the latest information. Everyone was too familiar with each other, so there was no need to exchange pleasantries. Constance took out the video she had personally recorded. The content of the video was the conversation between a few extraordinaries on the pool deck. Aside from the theoretical exchange, there was also Luo Nan's latest demonstration class. The heavily injured flesh and blood body of the ox demon from Ban City exploded into pieces and vaporized in the swimming pool amidst everyone's fervent discussion. The energy converged into the faith crystal hidden within the body. It seemed to have become nutrients, causing the originally empty thicket to become more and more lush and have a more translucent feeling. Of course, it could also be due to the darkening of the sky. One could tell from the color of the sky that this scene had happened not too long ago. Abner's expression was solemn. He flipped the video back and forth on the landing strip, zooming in and out. He watched it with incomparable seriousness. He guessed the various details and all sorts of legal bases. If there was something he didn't understand, he would ask Constance, who was present at the scene, for more information. Why did the so-called god of Ban City fall into Luonan's hands and be used by him? Have you determined the specifics? This is easy to guess. It should be the one who was scared away by the Amaterasu order some time ago. He's from the Great Marsh Order. He's the one Luonan frequently interacted with in Ban City. Is that so? Abner had already found the method to contact the Pope of the 100 Anthologies. He hesitated for a moment and felt that he shouldn't waste time on such details. When all was said and done, he was amazed by Luonan's technique, which was like the mass and energy conversion. Using the mind as a bridge, crossing the natural moat of matter and energy to realize efficient interconversion. This was an extremely important topic in the research of contemporary extraordinaries. To be able to realize this, even if it was only in form, there was still a lot of room for research. Unfortunately, not many details could be seen from such a brilliant technique in the video. Then again, would it really be possible to see it if Luonan was present at the scene? Abner raised his head to look at Constance. This eccentric lady was publicly recognized as the #1 boundary master of the inner world. She had deep attainments in the structure of matter, energy and soul strength. What did she think of it? Connie? Under the combination of the dark sky and the illumination of the runway, Constance's face under the hood was even more difficult to distinguish. Only his green eyes flickered slightly. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she paused for 2 or 3 seconds before speaking with her usual cold and deep voice. Luo Nan is an open person. There's no need to take the risk of starting a war with him. Abner was slightly stunned. He wanted to ask a technical question, but he didn't expect Constance, who was relatively aloof, to be so direct and negative. Perhaps because Abner's expression was too obvious, Constance turned slightly and gestured for him to look in a certain direction. The two of them were currently on the runway at the top of the runway, which was one of the highest points in Emerald Light. From here, across the flat surface of the runway, they could see the bright lights at the bow of the ship, as well as the vague outline of the ship under the lights. However, what Constance wanted Abner to see was actually outside the observable area, in the void where light and shadow intertwined. "Where's Ronan?" Abner was able to sense Luo Nan's existence because the thick clouds in the sky formed a highly connected energy relationship. Indeed, there was no concealment. It was the same as releasing an enormous amount of information on a higher plane without the slightest scruple. Abner believed that Luo Nan knew of his arrival. It was just that Luo Nan had no intention of responding. Perhaps this excessively young and powerful person was certain that no matter which extraordinary came to the ship, they would take the initiative to get close. This was indeed the case. The people on the Emerald Light, as well as the heavyweights who were about to arrive in the surrounding region, were like Abner. They were constantly paying attention to the complex changes in the depths of the clouds. They were no exception. It was too much to say that they were learning, but there was no problem in describing it as experiencing or referencing. According to Abner's own understanding, the structure of the energy that Luo Nan displayed in the depths of the clouds was complex, but it possessed an order and a sense of design that were rarely seen among modern ability users. Moreover, it wasn't an intuitive feeling on the level of common sense. Instead, it was a deeper regularity that required one to use the brain to perform in-depth analysis. This kid. Abner had unconsciously added a restriction when he said these words to prevent others from eavesdropping. However, he didn't finish the second half of the sentence. Romanus, who rarely spoke, sighed with emotion. "It's like he's solving a problem." Abner looked in that direction and nodded. Very accurate. Indeed, Luo Nan's energy movement within the clouds, whether it was the contraction, expansion, or transformation, all of them were deeply methodical. No matter how complex it was, there were very few redundancies. It was simply like a pre-designed program. If it wasn't for the occasional interference and subsequent adjustments, Abner would have believed that the driving force was an artificial intelligence. But this still made people deeply suspect that there was a highly abstract and extremely mature theoretical support behind this complex structural transformation. And this was precisely one of the most coveted values of Luo Nan. Openness is obviously a good thing. Abner sucked in air through his teeth, letting his saliva dry. Then he withdrew his gaze and responded to Constance's attitude. His stance didn't waver. In fact, it became even more resolute. "Connie, this isn't a question of openness or not. In other words, the definition of openness should be defined by more people." Abner lowered his head to look at his watch as he spoke. At this time, the reception banquet before the auction had already begun. There was no one here who would enter the boring social scene, but he needed to see someone. He told Romanus, "Tell Wang Yu to come see me." Romanus was about to agree, but Constance was already shaking his head. There was even a light chuckle coming from his hood. Wang Yu ran away. Maybe she never came. But as the president of the headquarters of the Ability User Society, Abner still had the basic cards to play. Approximately 5 minutes later, the incompetent host Wang Yu took the initiative to request a video call with him. The signal connected. The lighting arrangement on the other side was terrible. A large lamp shot out a strong light towards the gloomy sea. Wang Yu was in the dark under the light position. The shadows distorted too much information. Only her voice was respectful. "Mr. President, I'm really sorry. My grandfather's old illness is acting up today. He's in a bad mood. I'm accompanying him on a night fishing trip. I really can't take care of the jadeite light. Besides, I'm just the owner of a ship. I'm just lending out the ship. It probably doesn't make a difference whether I'm there or not." Chapter 1073. Abner was silent for a few seconds. His line of sight cut across the painting of the real-time video. In addition to the somewhat confused and unclear Wang Yu in the corner, there was a bloated figure wearing a thick hat and wrapping himself in winter clothes. The figure waved towards the camera. It was indeed Bai Hao. This old fellow was like this when he was sick. Looking at him, he had no intention of reminiscing about old times. Abner did not want to complicate things. Moreover, Wang Yu, a young man, already had the qualifications to be independent. Similarly, she also needed to be independent. Therefore, Abner just pretended not to see the details in the corner. His line of sight continued to stare at Wang Yu. He was too lazy to beat around the bush and said directly, "I was invited by you." "Ah, Mr. President, frankly speaking, this is really quite embarrassing." Wang Yu sighed very obviously. The world is full of twists and turns. When planning the event, who would have thought that a multi-party meeting that could have been a happy one would turn into a situation of competition? It seems that my friendly suggestion was still sloppy. Suggestion. Friendship? Abner's sharp eyes cut Wang Yu back and forth a few times. Sure enough, after jumping off the boat, she simply refused to admit it. Moreover, don't blame Abner for being sensitive. Listening to the words full of twists and turns, why did he feel that this young man was blaming him? The last appraisal meeting was indeed not in the plan. But earlier he repeatedly provoked Luo Nan to directly kill his way to Ban City. Could it be that you guys can't get away with such a stinky hand? Just before Abner was about to explode, Wang Yu clapped her hands and saluted him with her palms together. "Mr. President, please forgive me. The situation has been distorted to this extent. It is really a big failure on my part as the advisor. I am now accompanying my grandfather to go fishing. In addition to fulfilling my filial piety, I am also enjoying the sea breeze to reflect on myself. Take charge of an area, my ass. She really doesn't regard herself as an adult, does she?" Abner really did not expect that Wang Yu, who had always been calm and collected, would lose face so thoroughly. Moreover, it was in front of his grandfather. The situation was perfect. He could not spit out the words that he had used to denounce Wang Yu. Wang Yu was eloquent, so she took advantage of Abner's choking. "Regardless of whether Mr. President believes me or not, whether it's a suggestion or an arrangement, I'm still aiming for cooperation. Of course it has to be me. Us leading the cooperation. But in the business world, you take a step forward, I take a step back, and we adjust at any time. Sometimes when you retrench a little, you feel that it's still okay, so you continue. Sometimes when you feel that retrenching is too much of a loss, you stop your losses in time." Abner's yellow beard trembled slightly as he looked over coldly. "I'm not a businessman." Wang Yu smiled. "But I am. Therefore every move was an investment. After the investment plan was set, the shares could be adjusted and the profits could be reduced, but the predetermined costs could not be easily changed. Otherwise it would become a gamble. We can work in any industry and do anything, but gambling is never a good thing, isn't it?" Heh. Abner grinned. It was indeed funny. He had actually been taught a lesson by this young junior with such shallow business knowledge. At this point, there was no point in continuing the conversation. Abner didn't try to win the argument. Wang Yu retreated, and there would definitely be some repercussions, especially in terms of social relations and resources. But with his wealth and accumulation, he could afford it. And tonight, in this matter itself, this young man was already detached enough. It could be said that he was in an invincible position. Continuing the conversation was just asking to be humiliated. At this time it was Wang Yu who comforted him instead. "Well, let's talk about the matter as it stands. In fact, things aren't too bad. The auction is a mess, but the trade fair can still go on. The big exchange of distortion technology still has its place. What do you think?" Amidst Wang Yu's sorry, the call ended. Abner's eyes were dark. He had to admit that Wang Yu was very smart. He used an acceptable price to avoid what might be the most dangerous conflict on Earth. And this bastard obviously had a backup plan from the beginning, letting a trade fair take the lead. In this way, the price of his stop losses was even lower. In comparison, it was true that Abner's side did things too crudely. Abner admitted that he wanted to seize too much from the sudden appraisal meeting. He wanted to fight. He wanted to open the door to a new plane, eliminate dissidents, and reduce the reputation of Xia City's iron triangle within the society. Also, Gongqi's death forced him to do this. No one lived in a vacuum. It was true that Gongqi was the core of a power, but cutting out the core did not mean that the power would collapse. The leader's thinking would inevitably be affected and distorted in the complex growth and decline of a power. In comparison, when he saw Wang Yu's decisive actions, he was angry, but he was actually a little bit envious. But soon enough, Abner broke free from his chaotic thoughts. The more realistic problem was, he had to make a decision before the meeting officially began. President, the meeting date and agenda. Do you want to decide? At this moment, Constantine had already left, but Romanus was still there. He didn't seem to have any change in expression because of Abner's failed communication. Abner knew what Romanus meant. If they didn't decide on the meeting date and agenda, then there was no need to hold this highest-level roundtable conference tonight. If this was really the case, then they would have to be prepared to be treated as a joke. Abner turned his head and gazed at his Secretary General. What do you think? Romanus hesitated for a moment, but under Abner's strict gaze he finally gave a constructive opinion. We need to analyze Luo Nan's attitude. Huh. Romanus's eyelids drooped slightly as he flipped through the flexible e-ink screen. It was the first wave of intelligence sent by Constans. If we make a simple summary, his attitude towards this clearly targeted plot against him is that he doesn't deny it. He doesn't care. But he shows his claws and teeth in action. He's a good teacher. There's a contradiction in this. Fierce in appearance but weak in heart? Abner shook his head in denial as soon as the words left his mouth. It doesn't seem like it. No matter what it is, he has a goal. It's just that it seems to be a mismatch with what we are concerned about. Romanus switched the flexible screen to the video personally recorded by Constans, but he did not look at it. Instead, he raised his head and met Abner's gaze. President, don't you think that he's targeting Mr. Li Wei? Or should I say that he's targeting Mr. Li Wei? Chapter 1074. He really does pay a lot of attention to Li Wei. Abner nodded in acknowledgement. In fact, if it wasn't for Black Lion and the others intentionally or unintentionally deviating from the main topic in the video, perhaps they wouldn't be discussing the X factor in the end. But Li Wei's ancestors, Romanus wasn't just talking about today's matter. This includes the segmentation and integration of the formatting field during the live broadcast on the beach in T-City. There was also the live broadcast in Xia City earlier, where he used the dynamo core as an example. Even the term configuration was borrowed from there. Romanus paused a bit as he spoke to this point. It seemed like he was organizing his thoughts, but it also seemed like he was giving Abner space to think. I used to think that Luo Nan was targeting Yan Hong and his son, targeting the archetype format. But at this stage, Luo Nan has no reason to specifically target them. It wouldn't be strange for the father and son to suddenly die one day. Abner chuckled. Let's not talk about the old ones. Yan Yongbo doesn't look like he's going to die easily. Romanus lowered his eyelids again and smiled. Abner agreed with most of his views. At this level, Luo Nan can more or less see through some things. It's not strange for him to target Li Wei. But what about the target? They're very similar. Romanus replied calmly. At least Luo Nan is trying to make everyone think that he's the same as Mr. Li Wei. They're both people who control inconceivable resources and knowledge. They can bring great benefits to everyone, but they can also bring unfathomable disasters at any time. Him and Li Wei? Abner laughed hoarsely. He wants us to think that he's on equal footing with Li Wei? He wants us to give him the same treatment as Li Wei? Maybe. But it's also possible that he's just watching Mr. Li Wei. He has an indifferent attitude towards others. At least today that's how he behaved. You're saying he's provoking Mr. Li Wei. He's even waiting for that person to make a move. Abner was still laughing. Li Wei would do something like this. Halfway through his words he suddenly stopped. That was because Abner recalled that Li Wei had really been active a month ago due to an inexplicable missing uterine fibroids case in Spring City. Speaking of which, the bright red sarcoma in the video was also a tumor. There was no need for Romanus to make things too clear. That was enough. Abner had already understood. If we continue to stand in front, not only will we be used by Wang Yu, but Li Wei might also be happy to have a shield in front. Abner was very direct in front of his confidant. Romanus did not speak again. Abner, on the other hand, frowned. For the first time his heart wavered. It's okay to help others, but if I can't get a favor and end up in trouble, it's really unnecessary. He pondered for a moment before asking Romanus, do you have any suggestions? At this point, Romanus didn't waste any more time and directly said, "The agenda can be changed, but the meeting cannot be delayed." Yes, this is the main principle. Abner was not prepared to show his face and be treated as a joke. Although Romanus' words were not original, they were exactly what he wanted. And then, you can adjust your center of gravity. Start strong but end weak. Romanus lit up the flexible e-ink screen and swiped on the relevant topic. It just so happens that Lord Mitsuki has an idea. We can take advantage of the situation and let him be the main axis. Abner looked at the inexplicably long topic title. He was still a bit hesitant. His attitude towards Luo Nan seems to lean towards, we can communicate with Lord Mitsuki again and let him be the bridge. Tonight's roundtable conference can go off topic, it can be vague, and it can be completely useless. But no matter what, we must make Luo Nan admit to the crime of killing Deputy Secretary General Gong Qi. This was a victory on the political level. Abner's burnt yellow eyebrows raised. He will admit it. Romanus answered with drooping eyes. As long as he wants to maintain his indifferent attitude, why wouldn't he dare admit it? Maybe he even hopes that there will be an explosive point to push him a bit higher. Having said this, he habitually added, "This is my personal opinion. You can use it as a reference, President." Abner was a bit startled, but then he laughed out loud. "Roman, you must have an oriental soul in your shell. Over there, it's not over yet." On the pool deck, Luo Nan's consciousness shifted a bit. It was really that Abner's unfriendly thoughts were far too intense against him. Even though there was a restriction separating them, making it hard to distinguish the details, Luo Nan was far too close to Abner. His own sensing mode was special, causing him to be more or less disturbed by the warning signs. Of course, Luo Nan only gave it a glance before quickly withdrawing it. Before the auction and the roundtable conference began, Luo Nan had done everything that he could do. Her Majesty Empress Wu had taken a portion of what he hadn't done, and Blood Demon had volunteered to take another portion. Luo Nan couldn't ask for more. Right now he felt that it was more worthwhile to focus on what he was better at and polish his current advantages. The clouds in the sky surged violently, rising and falling from time to time. They were actually the majestic body of Mother Micah. They were intimately connected to Luo Nan's energy, and they were also deeply blended with the power of the soul cloak. Luo Nan's thoughts were shuttling back and forth within the body of Mother Micah. Everything else was fine. Right now he was mainly searching the depths of the clouds, searching for the erratic life and death, the flashing magnetism of lightning and fire. During this process, the materials of the School of Fantasy, the confrontation on the front lines of the relay station, and even the short but deep memories of the magnetic mica that he had experienced in his offline tests were supported by the enormous flood of information from Sunwheel Absolute Hell. He had confused the distinction between friend and foe. Several kinds of information were mixed together and compared to the incomplete model of the magnetic mica within the Misty Hall on the mental plane. The reason why Luo Nan was like this was because he was suddenly stimulated by a flash of inspiration during the discussion with many people. He suddenly discovered that there seemed to be a problem with his previous design train of thought. Or perhaps it could be said that he was limited by his first impression. It must be known that the magnetic mica looked like a vapor cloud, but it was absolutely not a vapor cloud. Its most fundamental ability didn't have much to do with this toy. The vapor cloud could only be considered a kind of external appearance. It was just some kind of carrier. What he had seen and experienced with his own eyes was the mutated form of the magnetic mica that had survived in the evil and poisonous environment of Sin Calamity era. What he researched and studied was the basic nomological state that the School of Fantasy had constructed using configuration and superconfiguration theory before Sin Calamity era. There was already a large difference between the two references. What's more, the original magnetic mica wasn't like this. Chapter 1075. According to the description of the School of Fantasy, the original magneto-optical mica was nothing more than the earliest inhabitants of some planet in the universe. They raised their heads to look at the clouds in the sky and watch them change according to the weather. They believed that the clouds had the ability to show the light, rain, yin and yang. They gathered and accumulated the power of thunder and lightning. They used this to form totem faith and projected their psychic powers. But this sort of thing happened every moment on countless planets with similar atmospheric environments in the boundless universe. It didn't constitute a necessary condition for the formation of a magneto-optical mica. It wasn't even a necessary condition. Generally speaking, the formation of the magneto-optical mica was a sudden change in the accumulation process of a special living system that interweaved with the power of faith. Its own unique fortune allowed it to form an incorporeal, wondrous form similar to magnetism in the long evolutionary process of accepting the power of faith. Within its structure, it even rubbed and operated with all things in the world. Inside, power of faith was the most basic raw material. Sudden changes were the most important opportunities. The special open living system structure was the foundation of the superconfiguration power, the laws of the universe. With the above three conditions working together, it was able to leap from its previous chaotic mode to the height of a fantasy breed. It gradually solidified its structure into shape, manifesting the existence and function of a magnetic-like force. This magnetic-like force was actually the main body of the magneto-optical mica. That's right. Magneto-optical mica. Magneto-optical mica. Magneto-optical mica was the main body. It was muscle tissue, nerves, bones, and blood. It was a method to control other targets, and it was an inevitable creation to mend itself. It was highly sensitive to psychic waves emitted on the mental plane of living creatures. It was easy to act on, forming the origin of the soul magnetization ability. It had a deep analysis and segmentation of the structure of all things in the world. It had an almost instinctive rubbing and bonding effect. It further developed the ability to stitch and create things on the basis of its previous foundation. And when the power of magnetization and stitch accumulated layer by layer, it formed a powerful interference and reconstruction effect on the material and mental plane within a certain range of the universe. Even space and time were warped until the barrier of space and time was broken through. The marvelous magnetic force effect allowed it to cross worlds and summon powerful existences, forming the inconceivable ability of the dimensional gate. Of course, according to the legends of the heavenly Yuan Empire, the final form of the magnetic mica jellyfish was also due to some indescribably powerful existence. It was due to the effects of postnatal modification. But this was no longer within the scope of Luo Nan's knowledge. He could only ignore it for now. If Luo Nan's train of thought was correct, then the mica he had created during this period of time couldn't even be considered an embryonic form. It was just a production line for the production of magnetism or soul magnetism. Luo Nan was quite fated with things like production lines. It was his believers and the lives that were bound to the living starry sky that provided him with the incessant soul power. It was the grand production line, a closed system made of his believers and the lives that were bound to the living starry sky. Now what he had painstakingly built was another magneto-optical production line. However, this line was still incomplete. It would be more appropriate to call it a factory. It could create the most suitable environment for the activation, existence, and effect of soul magnetism. It could even cause some sparks when they collided. But the core output was absolutely not here. It could only come from the imagination and faith of living beings. At the very least, at Luo Nan's current level of construction, it would be better to settle for the next best thing than to forcefully create the first ray of light from nothing. It would be to create an environment of faith that was closer to the very beginning. That was where the petri dish was located at the very beginning. Luo Nan had gone astray from the very beginning when he used the cloud structure to carry out the restoration route. Or perhaps he hadn't gone deep enough. But this couldn't be blamed on him. His most important frame of reference was the relevant theory of the school of fantasy. The theory was vague on this matter. On one hand, it was possible that the researchers of the school wanted to use pure configuration thinking to explain and restore from the very beginning. It was just like the research of bionic robots on Earth. Living beings were clearly placed before their eyes. They had everything, but they just had to use mechanical components and artificial intelligence to realize them. At the very least, they had to replace them to the greatest extent. This was a kind of academic train of thought. They didn't really want to efficiently create fantasy breeds. On the other hand, the topic of faith seemed to be a very sensitive area, whether it was before or after the Calamity era. Luo Nan had once used his own authority to search the external neurons database. It seemed that the research in this area was quite conservative. It was generally secretive. In any case, from what Luo Nan could see, the only thing that could be read out in the open was Lord Zhanghe's tome, Configuration, Faith, and the Great Limit. A rational reconstruction of historical evolution from ignorance to dawn, the magneto-optic mica chapter. Thinking too deeply was bound to lead to no results. Luonan didn't have the time to tangle with these questions that were destined to remain unanswered in the short term. Plus, he didn't have any academic persistence in this area. His research on the magneto-optical mica was just a method. It was a link in analyzing and reorganizing the structure of space and time. And this sort of analysis and reconstruction was used to deceive people. The reason why things had escalated to this point was because of Luonan's habitual train of thought of making a simple problem complicated. In short, right now he just needed the magneto-optical mica to construct a proper silhouette as soon as possible. Who cared if it was a pure configuration, a mutation, or an original ecology? Because of this, Luonan really put an effort on Niu Gui after he understood the key points. He no longer used Niu Gui as an experiment and reference to reverse engineer the fantasy breed. Instead, he carefully constructed a temporary petri dish. It just so happened that he could use it. Under Niu Gui's rule, the Great Zhe Order had accumulated a few dozen years of faith. No matter how distorted the process was, the order still had some accumulation of believers. Even though the projection of faith was mixed and not refined, it was already of much higher quality in modern society when compared to the vast majority of people's thoughts. There was more ample room for adjustment. Luonan pondered over how to use his Luonan ruler in conjunction with the Wraith sign to realize the distortion of the direction of the power of faith. He didn't need to be long and devout. He just needed to be able to infinitely approach the original environment and form a petri dish. He would cultivate the first magneto-optical mica. This was equivalent to creating an industrial machine. The subsequent evolution could then proceed smoothly and logically. Therefore, Luonan's attention was divided into two parts. One part was the structure of the mica in the sky. He continued to observe, comb, and deduce. The other part was the virtual thicket that had just been watered with Niu Gui's flesh and blood. He used the control lines of the mica to slice up layer by layer and reverse permeate. He carried out a thorough understanding of the system of believers and tried to make adjustments. Under the interference of an extraordinary, the winds and clouds changed color in the front and the undercurrents surged in the back. Generally speaking, the clouds in the sky were more eye-catching. On the jadeite light, whether it was an extraordinary, a relatively ordinary ability user, or an ordinary passenger with restless hearts, they all paid attention to it from time to time. As for Niu Gui, who had already been reborn and transformed, he seemed cold and cheerless, but there were actually people watching him. Chapter 1076. Luonan's finger, which had been sketching the water vapor diagram, paused for a moment. It was a bit sluggish, but it soon returned to normal. The other party was not purposely making things difficult for him. It was just that the will it sent over was so focused that it almost lost its sense of propriety and interfered with the Ox Ghost card's tree of nothingness. Luonan didn't even need to react when the interference occurred. The other side instantly retreated far away. It had a very nervous appearance. Luonan laughed in spite of himself. Maybe I should call him a coward. The tree of nothingness was the structural core of a belief system, and Luonan had personally reinforced it. It was impossible for it to shatter with a single touch. Was there a need to be so careful? No matter what was said, it was a good thing that Luonan had thought things through thoroughly. Luonan simply ignored Luonan and continued to research and make adjustments. He hoped to be able to implement the changes in his train of thought into practical configuration designs as soon as possible. He wanted to connect the petri dish and the production line. Luonan continued to evaluate the possibility of achieving his goal. He knew that it was impossible to nurture a fantasy breed overnight, but as long as the train of thought was clear, the design was right, and the structure was adjusted, the continuous accumulation would eventually succeed. Yep, I have a small goal tonight: to nurture the first ray of light. It's a little difficult, but it's not impossible. The existence of the cowards caused the number of extraordinaries in the vicinity of the jadeite light to rise to double digits, and it was likely to rise even further. The situation became even more complicated, but everyone had a gentleman's agreement in the end. At the same time, Luonan simply ignored Her Majesty Empress Wu due to her inexplicable trust in her character. At this point in time, it would be difficult for him to study in peace. Zhang Yingying, who had been helping with the chores before the meeting, walked over quietly. She didn't interrupt his train of thought, but it was obvious that she had something to say. Luonan confirmed the time, but he didn't expect to fish out any more profit from it. He simply waved his hand and erased the structural sketches. He floated lightly to the side of the swimming pool. Zhang Yingying curiously glanced at the center of the pool. That cowardly, tasteless and boneless cow ghost had suddenly become like this. It was more or less surprising. But soon she focused her attention on Luo Nan. She wanted to see if Luo Nan would have any psychological fluctuations at this stage. But all she saw at this time was Luo Nan's warm and intimate smiling face. "Sister Yingying, what's the matter?" Zhang Yingying blinked. "We're definitely going to have that roundtable conference tonight." It was basically confirmed. There probably wouldn't be any changes. The boss asked me to pass the agenda to you. Basic? Roughly? Luo Nan looked at Zhang Yingying's projection interface, looking at the formal agenda list. The organizer of the conference, the participants, the format of the conference and so on were clearly written on it. It was almost completely within his expectations. The only variables left were the meeting time and agenda. The time is set for the East and West Districts 2200 hours tonight. That was 2 hours after the auction started. If there were no accidents, the auction should have ended by then. It was relatively reasonable. As for the agenda, at this time Luo Nan had already read out the important parts in a low voice. Continue the matters related to the identification meeting. Headquarters personnel adjustments after the death of Deputy Secretary General Gong Qi. And the Lord of the Secret Contract. The topic of the agenda was a bit long, so Luo Nan skipped it. It looks rather ordinary. Very vague, right? Zhang Yingying smiled. Boss said that even though it's boring it might be a good sign for you. Luo Nan didn't care. Don't tell me we have to count on that side. Being timid is better than being stubborn. Boss has already received more accurate information. Due to your super high-profile performance these past few days, their attitude has clearly softened. Someone has already sent a message to boss, saying that everyone needs to communicate and discuss. I'm afraid that the next 3 hours will be even more exciting than the auction. Blood Demon's cackling laughter interrupted Zhang Yingying's words. Then he appeared on the deck. Not only did they send a message to Her Majesty Empress Wu, they also think quite highly of me. I came here this time to shoulder the heavy responsibility of a lobbyist. A lobbyist? Blood Demon kept Luo Nan in suspense. It's about time. Let's go directly to the venue. Tonight isn't just for the auction. It's true that the current banquet is very boring, but the following free trade fair is still a bit interesting. I remember you saying that you wanted to experience the current state of development in distortion technology. This is a good opportunity. Luo Nan had indeed said something similar when they were chatting before. In any case, he didn't expect to be able to produce a complete version of a magneto-optical mica in the half an hour before the auction. He nodded indifferently. We still need to go to Area C, right? Let's go. You don't know how hard it is for some people to wait right now. Blood Demon simply came over. You pulled on her flip-flops. She took the lead and walked in front. Soon a group of people entered the ship's hold. The elevator hall was right in front of them. Luo Nan actually had something he wanted to ask. About High Lord Mitsuki's topic. In the end, Mr. Luo Nan, I'm very sorry to disturb you. Huh. The source of the voice came from a group of people who had been waiting in the elevator hall for a long time. To be more precise, it came from the formally dressed woman at the very front. Her clothes were formal, but one could feel an outstanding sense of design at a glance. Her makeup was exquisite and it was hard to tell her age. But in the end she was an outstanding beauty. Moreover, she had quite the status. Even though she held a folder in her hand, she didn't look like a secretary. However, when Luo Nan cast his gaze over, this formally dressed woman immediately made a 90-degree bow. There were always 6 or 7 people behind her and they all bowed at the same time. Their posture was quite intimidating. Luo Nan raised an eyebrow. You guys. Master Luo Nan, please accept our apologies. Luo Nan had only heard of such a Chunibu form of address in Snake Tongue back in Ban City. Yep, that's the smell. Before Luo Nan could respond, Blood Demon and Zhang Yingying glanced at each other. They both had their own guesses. Zhang Yingying moved closer to Luo Nan. She was just about to whisper the identities of these people when she never expected Luo Nan to walk a step ahead of her. Luo Nan didn't say anything. He let them maintain their 90-degree bows. He just walked to the front of the formally dressed woman at the very front and extended his hand. Due to the woman's posture and angle, it looked as if he was reaching directly into the woman's lapel. Blood Demon watched with interest. Zhang Yingying's eyebrows jumped up, but she didn't say anything in the end. As for Luonan, he just took the folder from the woman's arm. He also took off a corsage-like ornament from her chest in passing. He wasn't in a rush to look at the contents of the folder. He just turned the corsage slightly to an angle and looked at the rather exquisite design engraved on it. This mountain. Tiama Auction House. Luonan wasn't surprised in the slightest. He flipped open the folder and looked at the documents inside. This was the original copy of the commission auction contract. There was no need to mention the contents. When he flipped to the end, an unfamiliar name was signed on the client's position. But it was very interesting. There was a note in parentheses at the end. Horned Demon.